Tonight we are really, really excited to have with us Noah Zatzman. Noah is a principal at Aurora and is involved in public affairs and a longtime PR professional, and also a political strategist with extensive background in government and politics and industry. And really what we're here to talk about is Noah's time when he served as a top aide to the federal Green Party leader, Anna Paul. But his background in Canadian politics goes beyond that. He worked for several years as a senior advisor for the Premier of Ontario. He served as a special assistant to a former Liberal MP, and he has provided expert in-house communication support to some really big companies in Canada, including Sun Life Financial and others. And he is also deeply involved in various causes, including advocacy for the environment and for the queer community. And he's currently the co-chair of the UJA Federation's new LGBTQ plus division. And you all know Noah, I think, from the headlines and from everything else. We'll get into that. We'll welcome him on. Noah, welcome. It's really a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, Rabbi, thank you so much for having me, and to the Beth Tikva community. I so appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about my experience with Anna Paul, with the Green Party, and anti-Semitism on the left, and what we've been seeing the last year and months and beyond.
I know as a rabbi, I've been speaking about since my rabbinate began 5 years ago, and it almost feels like they're happening more and more often. These moments where in liberal circles, it seems that you're absolutely fine as long as your support for Israel, your something that's central to a Jewish identity, is left at the door. We saw it with the Dyke March in Chicago, where they were banned with the LGBTQ Israeli flag, and we've seen it all over the place. So I know it's a hot topic, but before we dive in, you're a local boy, you're a Jewish boy, you're from Toronto, you went to Chat. How did you get into politics?
So, how I got in was through the Canada-Israel Committee, which was the predecessor of CJA, for those who know. They ran an internship program, a parliamentary internship program, and I applied. A good friend suggested in 2007, when I was about 23 years old. I graduated with my degree in political science from York, and was interested generally in politics, and had made this suggestion to enter this internship program. And they were the ones who connected me with Navdeep Bains, who ended up being the industry minister in Mr. Trudeau's government. And that was my beginning at 23 on Parliament Hill. There were 6 of us selected from across the country, very involved. We had to be involved in the Jewish community previously to have gotten this internship. And they placed us in these jobs. I had a friend who worked for Bob Ray. I worked for Navdeep. The rest worked for Conservatives. It was the Harper years. And they placed me in this role at an opportune time, a key opportune time, right before the coalition crisis of 2008. When Michael Jean had to fly back, and we weren't sure if there would be a conservative government or a liberal government. It was an incredible time, and those jobs on Parliament Hill, these jobs working as executive assistants or key advisors to members of Parliament, are impossible jobs to get, impossible jobs to figure out how to get without some sort of schlep. And they provided that schlep. They provided that in. And really the rest from there and to Premier Wynne and then to Anna was because of that initial role, and it was the Jewish community that connected me initially. Such a key factor was that internship. The people I met there were the ones who were running the government for Premier Wynne following Premier McGuinty's tenure. They brought me right into the Premier's office about 4 years later. And that, and we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, Rabbi, but that was what got me sort of through the door, both personal and professional, to get me into the position with Anna Paul, where you heard that I was the chief of staff to Anna Paul on the news for, about 6 months thereafter. So it was about 10 or 15 years of work in politics from the time I was 22, 23. up until, and again, as most of you probably know, I was not a member of the Green Party. Annie just was a family friend who I wanted to help.
Interesting that your journey into politics started through these Jewish connections in this Jewish organization. And in the end, right, that's the infamous tweet that we're here to talk about, that it was your Judaism that was, I won't say the end of your political career, but the end of at least this particular job. So I'll ask you about that, but I want to just, so everyone has what we're talking about. I know most people have seen it. They've seen the headlines. It was all over the news, but we'll put it up here, right? This was the infamous tweet, Facebook post in this case.
Facebook post, yes, just to be specific.
To be accurate, right? This is the Facebook post, right? Shabbat Shalom. I've never experienced more anti-Semitism and Jew hatred from people I thought I knew well than I did this week. Right? And this includes your time at York, which we've spoken about at Beth Tikva before, some of the things that have been in the news about there. But what exactly were you specifically, just so everyone is aware, talking about when you wrote this? What was the anti-Semitism you experienced this week? Right? Keep in mind, everyone, this is when the conflict was happening, right in the middle of it, with Israel and Gaza, when the rockets were being shot in I think a week and a half period. Almost 4,000 rockets were shot into Israel, and Israel defended themselves. So that's what the background for this. So what was the anti-Semitism that you were experiencing?
So, I mean, it was multi-pronged, Rabbi. At that time, everyone knows that, we've been working with the Green Party caucus, Jenica Atwin and Paul Manley, as well as Elizabeth May, the former leader, for a year. This May 14th, 2021, this is the date of the tweet. This came after the tweets and the Facebook messages posted by the Green MPs and many other MPs, where they, and again, I think the key detail here is that I've been working with these offices and these folks for almost a year, very closely, nearly every day, where they began to talk about apartheid and ethnic cleansing. And so this came after a week where I am trying to explain to these folks that I thought I had had a connection with, that I've been working with on so many issues, indigenous issues, issues related to the Serb. I mean, there were such huge, massive things that we had been working on together. It ended up right before this post, I had been begging Jenica Atwin, who's now a liberal backbencher, for those who know, begging Jenica Atwin, please remove the post. There's no apartheid in Israel. How could you possibly think that? Look at the facts. And I went on to say that if you are accusing the Jewish people of apartheid, you are accusing me, senior advisor to Anna Paul, of apartheid. How ridiculous that is and sounds. And not only that, you don't realize, well, they're not accusing me, they're accusing Israel. I'm like, you're accusing my cousin in Jerusalem. You're accusing my family in the north. This is me. You're saying it about me. So, this went hand in hand with a lot of people I knew in the climate community, who I'd worked with for a few years previously on a whole range of issues related to the climate, related to net zero, who were saying these incredibly awful things. And it was almost like the whole movement, the progressive movement together, was coming down on Israel in a way I'd never experienced. And so I had to push back. I know we're going to go through the whole Facebook post and line by line, but in terms of that initial feeling, USDS, chat, Camp Kadima, all of my experiences. Why did CIC put me there in the first place? To speak up in this moment. That's my feeling. So anyway, I know we're going to go through the whole post.
No, it's great. There's so much to talk about. So I hope we get through everything. When you were speaking, it occurred to me, right, or that post that she put, right, there's no two sides about it. This was, I think, if I'm correct, this was one of the posts that was the offending one. And here in progressive circles, so often we have these conversations about nuance and the interplay of all sorts of different factors, from socioeconomic and cultural and everything else that goes into things. And here is just a very much, there's no middle ground, there's no potential, wrong. I stand with Palestine. There are no two sides to this conflict, only human rights abuses. Right? That's one of the most straightforward, no wiggle room statements I've ever heard from a politician. And it's one of the most nuanced conflicts throughout history. I've certainly myself gotten in trouble at times or complaints speaking out for the rights of Palestinians, which for me, it's always bothered me that in the Jewish community, sometimes we don't do enough to speak up about Palestinian rights because there are civilians, there's children, there are women, there are other Palestinian men that are not Hamas, right? They're not shooting rockets, they're not throwing rocks, they're not trying to murder Israelis. But at the same time, there are Hamas. There are people that are trying to murder Israelis, not soldiers, but women and children. I have cousins who are living in Israel, and their children, when they gave me a tour of the school, elementary school, had these big concrete like caterpillars. And I was asking, like, oh, like, what are those for? And it's for when there's a rocket attack and they're on the schoolyard so they can hide in it. And they painted them nice and cute. They were just big concrete tubes essentially painted, right? It's what 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds are trained to do there. And here where there's no two sides to the conflict.
I would say also, Rabbi, that Ms. Atwin, I mean, it seems to, in this post, in this tweet, is talking, linking herself with the Palestinian cause and linking herself with this misinformation. So, I mean, like you said, so there's no other side. It's not black, it's just completely black and white. A week later, she changed her position. A week later, when she crossed the floor of the House of Commons, blaming myself and Anami and the Israel situation. And then 3 days later, you had a communique from her office, which was really from the Prime Minister's office, saying, just kidding. So what an ally to Palestinians. 3 days later, right? 3 days later, her career on the line, I guess. So it's these, I mean, and what she did 3 days later in the statement was what Anami and I were asking her to do all along. So what's the difference? What's the difference? I think, yes, she was taken in by, I think we'll talk about a lot tonight, I think, by this progressive move that we're seeing with AOC, with Rashida Tlaib, with the Squad, to paint the Jewish people as colonizers of our own land. As, I mean, we'll go much more into it, but I think we have a big bit of hasbara to do on the left, because we've gone around the other side now, where we're coming back to the 1970s at the UN. Zionism is racism. So that's what she believes. That's what the party, the whole Green Party, believes. And one thing I'll say before I toss it back to you, Rabbi, is that right before this all happened, when I had posted this tweet we're seeing, this Facebook post we're seeing, Anami's chief of staff, her actual chief of staff, called me and asked me in whispered, hushed tones. He said, Noah, is Anami a Zionist? I said,
oh my gosh.
I said, Phil, I'm a Zionist. Zionist just means Jewish self-determination. If you're a Jew, you're a Zionist. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, we can go through, but the organized Jewish, it's just Jewish self-determination. But the leftists have, the progressives have altered it, right? And have brought it back to this 1970s UN, Zionism is racism connotation. And so we've got to fight back.
I'm curious about Atwin's change of heart. You said you think she was brought in by, this talk and everything that was happening in the Green Party about Zionism and the Palestinian cause. Did you think she had a change of heart, or was this a political pressure change? Which view do you think she really holds?
I think she holds the former view, the apartheid view. I think that she had been in negotiations with the Liberal Party and Dominique Leblanc for a few weeks before that. I think the negotiations had started before the Israel. Certainly, this is what the Jewish community was told. Was the negotiations with Ms. Atwin had started before the Israel-Hamas conflict. And this sort of, I think she didn't realize this would jeopardize her place in the Liberal caucus. And when she did realize, she switched. But yes, I think that she really is one of these sort of coastal progressives, East Coast, West Coast, that seems to believe that Israel is an apartheid state, and I'm just not sure. Let alone if a lot of these folks have ever been to the region, understand the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, understand the society as it works truly, understand that, you know, if you see an Israeli and Palestinian kissing on the streets of Tel Aviv, they will not be arrested. Like, it's just so loony. But I think that it speaks to, you know, what's happening on the left, where old school, these medieval tropes, this old school medieval anti-Semitism is back. It's back, and Israel is the Jew, the biggest Jew of all.
Pop back over just to a tweet for a moment, or not the tweet, the Facebook post. Right, you called out a few different people.
Yeah.
But this ending, right? We will not accept an apology if you realize what you've done. We will work to defeat you, bring in progressive climate champions who are anti-fascist, Antifa, and pro-LGBT, pro-indigenous sovereignty, and Zionists. Am Yisrael Chai. Right? That to me is the fascinating part of all of this. Right? To people in the Green Party, you're some right-wing nut job. But if you take out the Israel party, to anybody on the right, you are, you know, a bleeding heart liberal. So it's to me just crazy that in that one view that Israel is this litmus test on the left for if you're within it or not. Like, where do we go from here? Is there a future on the left for pro-Israel activists, for people like yourself?
Well, I think it's a great question, Rabbi. There has to be. I mean, I think we see with the upcoming U.S. Midterms, a lot of elections here in Canada, in the UK. We can't cede Israel to one party, right? We have to engage. We can't let the Democrats go to AOC. We have to go to Richie Torres, right? Who's a progressive pro-Israel legislator, and that's I think that's what we have to be bringing in. I think one of the reasons that the left reacted so hysterically to my post was the linkages, as you say, between Zionism and Israel as a progressive force, a liberal force, and all of these other causes, indigenous, particularly indigenous. We are the indigenous people of Israel. Say it over and over and over again. Palestinians are as well, but we are, and we want that recognized, period. And they refuse to recognize it. And the reason they do that is for old school anti-Semitic reasons, right? Which I'm sure we'll talk more about as well. But it was that linkage. And how many times, when the chief of staff whispers to me, is she a Zionist? Socialists founded Israel. Have you heard of a kibbutz? The leftists and the socialists and progressives founded the state of Israel. David Ben-Gurion. This is a complete misunderstanding of history. No understanding of history. They just understand the tweet they saw from AOC, who retweeted from a Hollywood celebrity, who retweeted from Bella Hadid, and that's what they're going on. So we have a lot of work to do, and I think it starts with us in the community to be bringing back these activists, these progressive activists, to Israel. When I went on the March of the Living Rabbi in 2005, the 60th anniversary of the victory in Europe, 150 students, many of whom are active now in politics, were brought to Poland and Israel on that trip. 150 Jewish students. On the trip with us were 150 non-Jewish students, just as active in their student councils, in their campus associations. And those are the people, just like those 150 Jewish people in 2005, many of whom are now in business and politics, et cetera. So are those people. So are the non-Jewish people. And they are the greatest allies. I can't tell you. If I ever see any of them, the first thing they'll say to me is, we remember the time we were with you at Auschwitz. We remember the time we were with you at the Kotel in Yerushalayim. We took them. We had to take them, right? So I think it's this idea of a shared values. And I remember the wonderful CIC and wonderful, I remember, Darcy Richler, shout out to Darcy, used to go around Canada talking about shared values. We need to bring that back.
one of my good friends from my undergrad, from my days in AE Pi, ended up being for a number of years executive director of an organization called the Wider Bridge. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They actually do exactly what we're talking about. It's an LGBTQ advocacy organization that in Israel does advocacy for the LGBTQ community. And outside of Israel in the diaspora, in the LGBTQ community, does advocacy for Israel. And they do just that. They do a trip bringing leaders to Israel to go see it, to go participate in the Pride Parade, to talk to queer Palestinians that are living in the West Bank about what their life is like there. And they come away, like you said, they're huge allies after that, after they actually first see it. But if I remember correctly, I think it was Rashida Tlaib that refused to go visit when she had a chance to go on a trip for Congress men and women in the States to go to Israel, who like absolutely refused to go and get to see it and things like that.
When it comes to the LGBTQ community, and I'm so proud to be a co-chair of the UJA, a new UJ division, LGBTQ plus division at UJ Federation. But I think that, so many of the responses I got on the left when this all happened in May, the best responses, the most understanding responses were the ones from my folks in the gay community, in the queer community. And the reason was because, like you said, Israel has done a very good job because of Tel Aviv and Pride and all that, Hilton Beach, to bring gay men specifically to Israel for this party. What that also means in terms of the hasbara of it is that all of these gay men that I know and queer people who are also involved in this also know that there's no apartheid in Israel. Why? They've celebrated Pride on the beach at Hilton with every race, every culture, every, in a free society, like they know, they've been. So they're not, the misinformation is not going to impact their advocacy. And they might have issues with former Prime Minister Netanyahu or the current administration. But again, it's not going to, you are colonizing they completely understand the fact that it's not black and white is what I would say. But I think that we've got to do that. We have got to, I see billboards for Pride. I see so much advertising pumped in. We've got to do that for every community, right? We've got to do, if there's going to be a Pride trip, in June, let's make a trip with climate activists in August, right? I work with Climate Strike Canada, with the folks that are affiliated with Greta Thunberg. These are the folks. I mean, Greta, these Greta teens, right? Climate Strike Canada here in Canada, and a number of other groups. These are the folks who are going to be leading the charge in the future. And so we need to get to them now. It's vital. So whatever work I can do, and I think we all can do to really just bring people to Israel, to share with them the truth and show them the truth, that makes all the difference. Because again, so many of the people that helped me in the media, politically, while this went on in May and June and July in the national news, who were not Jewish, were people who were on that trip with me at Birkenau. It just,
Wow.
that is the truth.
If we jump back to the tweets for a moment, sorry, let's jump over here for a second. But Anna May Paul is no stranger to the Beth Tikva community, because she spoke with us when we were at Yom Kippur 2 years ago. In 2020, she came and she spoke to our community. And I often throughout had congregants saying to me, why isn't she speaking up for Israel? Why isn't she speaking up for Israel once she got elected? So while this was happening, this was the statement that the Green Party put out while the violence was happening, right? The Green Party of Canada calls for an immediate de-escalation in the violence and return to dialogue as a means to seeking a peaceful solution. Violence and confrontation will not bring solution, only more suffering, right? That's the quote from her. And I certainly have people in our community that would have liked her to speak out more strongly in that case. The sentiment, the violence and confrontation is not a solution to ending suffering. I share. I also would maybe have liked something that clarified things. But this was Atwin's response again, Jenica Atwin's response. It is a totally inadequate statement. Forced evictions must end. I stand with Palestine and condemn the unthinkable airstrikes in Gaza and apartheid. Someone like that, is a trip going to change their mind, really?
Oh, but she's too far in the process. She's a 31, 32-year-old, mom in New Brunswick. She's been, very much a part of the Green movement in New Brunswick over the years. We didn't get to her in time, right? We didn't get to her in time. But again, that is evocative of so many people. I think we've seen this now with TDSB and so many other instances in Canada. This is evocative of the new left, of people coming up, through the left. And I think the problem in Canada, Rabbi, is that we don't have our answer to AOC. We don't have our answer to Jenica. We don't have our Richie Torres, right? We don't have, and we need to build that bench of progressive Zionists, right? We need to build that bench because we're getting to a point where we're risking, both in the US and Canada and Europe, a split. I'm not happy with statements, that, for example, Governor Haley made as it was related to AIPAC. I'm sure many saw. I don't approve of that. I think that will be no good for when the next Democrat administration comes in. That will be no good, right? So I think the same here. I think that we need to invest on the left. I obviously perhaps made a mistake going with the Green Party, so anti-Israel over so many years. But for me, it was I was helping a family friend, and I was helping a Jewish person succeed, on the progressive side of things. But again, this is not, as I think I mentioned to you, Rabbi, previously, for those watching, what happened with the Green Party and Annie and myself, and what's happening in the States and Europe. Jeremy Corbyn was sort of the beginning of this in the United Kingdom, as many remember. This is the beginning. And we have a lot of Hasbara to do. I know I keep repeating myself over and over again, but it's going to take both a financial commitment and a volunteer commitment, sort of just a on the ground sort of working commitment to do what we've done in the queer community, which is not make them all rabid Likudniks, but they are pro-Israel. And it's beyond just the right to exist, right? So I think that, speaking, just going back to your point, which was that Anime wasn't effusive about Israel in your talk, that was a source of a lot of our disagreements, our only disagreements, which was over the year that I worked with her, which was the level in which we should be supportive of Israel, and what is not palatable to the Paul Manleys of the world. But again, by the time May came, and we were as a community experiencing all the hate and all of the discrimination when the Hamas events happened, it was over. Once you get to apartheid and ethnic cleansing, I mean, it's and so ultimately, and Anime said this, that she didn't view Mr. Manley as being an anti-Semite. I don't agree. I think he's a huge anti-Semite, and but I do recognize, Rabbi, there was a distinction in terms of how we approach things. What I would say is, at the end of the day, when it came down to it, Anime was there, and she did not run Israel over the bus, did not run me over the bus with a bus. So I think that for me, in terms of the ending, I think shows her her strong commitment to Israel and to the community. But also, she was obviously trying to clear a path through May and June and July into the general election, where she could do both, right? Obviously, she couldn't, because the party was intrinsically anti-Semitic, beyond a shadow of anything that we could have imagined. So she was not able to do that.
So I'm actually curious, because throughout the year after she spoke at our synagogue, and I would have congregants saying to me, why isn't she speaking up? Or some people imagined I had a direct connection to her because we interviewed, that I could just call her up and chat with her. And I would always try to justify, look, isn't it better that she has a seat at the table, right? We know that she isn't the same far out there as these anti-Israel members of the party. We know that isn't what she thinks. Isn't it better that she has a seat at the table, a voice at the table? She's leading the table, than to speak up and not have made it into the election, not have been there. But then actually, I had a member, a congregant who is on this call now, a very wise congregant, said to me, what good is her having a seat at the table if she's not going to use her voice? Do you think that she was able to make any impact in terms of this issue? She may have on other issues, or did her sitting at the table, did she change anyone's minds that was involved about Israel is more nuanced? Israel is not a Zionist colonizer. Israel is not an apartheid state, or was this a chance that was maybe squandered?
Yeah, it was, Israel, the whole year, Israel was, the third rail on the subway system that just we could never touch. And it was very difficult. I mean, it was a very difficult thing. But most of the year, I would say, Rabbi, we were talking some policy distinctions until it got to April. And the incidents, no Matzmut, and then the incidents with Israel and Hamas, and then things began to shift and alter. Where I think everybody, given what had happened with the leadership, of course, Anami Paul defeated Dmitry Lascaris, one of the country's most notorious anti-Semites, in a very close race, actually. Very, very close, only a few percentage points. And so being aware that this person had sort of collected all the country's sort of leftist anti-Semites in his leadership sort of run, we knew that half of the party held these views. And we didn't, I think the feeling was that we didn't want to rock the boat. But again, when we got to the point of apartheid, ethnic cleansing, every day, Paul Manley's chief of staff through April would call me. And I thought he's calling me, BC's on fire here. It's the climate party. And he's calling me and asking me, do I know of all the fascist doings of Prime Minister Netanyahu? And I'm thinking to myself, don't talk to me about fascism when it comes to this issue, because how many elections have the Israelis had? And how many elections have the Palestinians had? Don't talk to me about fascism. This is ridiculous. As and of course, a few months later, Mr. Netanyahu was not the prime minister. The kingmaker was in the Islamist part. The facts seem to be completely not a part of the discussion, because mostly Israel was not part of the discussion, because we knew this was sort of a possibility given what had happened in the leadership. I know that Elizabeth May and Paul Manley blamed me for Jenica crossing the floor and the whole hullabaloo. I think that this was always, she was always going to cross the floor. But the fact that she used the Jewish community in this issue as sort of a reason, a cudgel to do so, I think is terrible. I agree with your congregant that you cannot, what's the point, right? Like, what's the point of being in the seat? What's the point of being the Green Party? What's the point of being in the room with the Prime Minister and Mr. Singh and Mr. O'Toole and Theresa Tam, right, during the height of it, if you're not going to live out your most basic values? And I think, again, I think that the statement was not something that I necessarily completely agreed with. To me, the violence was being perpetrated by the Hamas terrorist entity, period. And there was no, there were the black, and I think the subtlety involved Sheikh Jarrah, and I've spoken to that, and there are issues that we have to confront. But again, these lies that are thrown at us by the left now, for almost, and again, what was so strange to me in all of this was none of these people are Palestinians or Arabs who are calling me. And when you have, Mr. Manley call you, when you have Janet Gatwin call you, when you have Elizabeth May call you, and have David Suzuki call you, and say that this is what anti-Semitism is. Oh, no. Non-Jews are telling Jews what anti-Semitism is? Can you imagine if they were telling during the George Floyd situation, no, Black community, this is what racism is, and we're going to tell you what it is, and this is how we're going to, no. You listen, and you come to us to see how you can be an ally. And there was no recognition of that. There never is with the Jewish people, right?
It's
Everybody else,
absolutely true. It's left out. We saw this just now in Texas. There are already people out there that are saying it wasn't anti-Semitism. This was about politics. This was about getting a political prisoner released from jail, right? He took over a synagogue, held a rabbi and congregants hostage on Shabbat morning, and asked the rabbi of that synagogue to call another rabbi in New York City because he believes that that rabbi has some political power and can get a prisoner released by the United States federal government, right? That is the oldest anti-Semitic trope that there is, that Jews are pulling the strings back there, that there's some rabbi out there that can get a prisoner released from a federal penitentiary just like that.
yeah,
And yet I see it online, right? This was about politics. This isn't anti-Semitism. And it's days after guns were held to Jews' heads. And again, like you said, if this was George Floyd, if this was about the indigenous, if this was about any other community, and someone was to say, that's not what I meant, or I don't know, that's you're being overly sensitive, right? We've seen that with the Squad making statements all the time that Jews say, this is anti-Semitic, what you said, AOC or Rashida Tlaib, right? This is anti-Semitic. And they go, it's not what I meant. You're misinterpreting. Any other group that wouldn't be okay.
yeah, and that's why I said I'm going to work to defeat you. There's no room for anti-Semites in Parliament. I'm sorry, there's no room. And so, Mr. Manley lost his seat. We're better for it. We're better off as a country. The House of Commons is better off. And there are a number of others, but to lose the biggest anti-Semite in all of this, to lose the biggest anti-Semite in the House of Commons, good. Keep going, right? Keep going. But we have a big issue. And the specter of Texas is something that, I know that something that Anami and I thought about every day. Anami started receiving anti-Semitic abuse from the day she announced in the two Januaries ago. It's the kind of abuse that I received online, from folks like, I'm sure, like this Meshuggah in Texas terrorist from the UK, right? And it's the idea that what happens online, what proliferates online, can go everywhere, right? It's not just around the corner. It can get to the UK. It can get to California. It can get here and there. And so that's one of the reasons also I mentioned I felt weird about putting my mezuzah up during this whole thing, And when I see something like Texas, I think we're all thinking the same thing, to be identified as a Jew, to be identified as defending Israel. These are not things even 10 years ago that I think would have caused the reaction that it did. Two prominent Green Party members, when this happened, joked that they should send me to the guillotine, right? To behead me. And I mean, thinking about Texas, I'm thinking about what U.S. Homeland Security said as related to the online proliferation that came from these sites that this terrorist from the UK was connected into, I think speaks to the fact that what happens online, what these, especially on the left, these folks are saying, what AOC is saying, what Rashida Tlaib is saying, it filters down. It filters down. And so again, none of the folks that I called out, Mr. Singh, there were a number of other MPs, including Liberal MPs, I believe should be in Parliament and hold these views. They are views that are, Mr. Singh wants us to stop selling arms to Israel. He doesn't even understand which way it actually goes, right? In terms of that relationship, in terms of the military relationship. So, I mean, for Mr. Singh to have said during this time, as I'm sure many people remember in May, that we should stop selling. I mean, this is the defense of the Jewish people, right? What does that mean? No more arms for you, Israel. No more way to defend yourself, Israel. That's what he says. That's what he means. And I know because I happened to work for Premier Nguyen when we worked in 2016, when we worked on the BDS legislation with the Conservative Party. It was a bipartisan thing, a wonderful thing. And Mr. Singh got up and spoke in the Ontario legislature in 2016 against Israel, only one of 5 NDP members to do so for no reason. It was happening. It was a Liberal majority government with the Conservatives in the Ontario. It was happening, but he got up there and he spoke against Israel. I never forgot it. Never forgot it. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. Was there another? Did I miss anything on that question, Rabbi?
No, it was good. But what you touched on, that's the part of this that's so insidious, because we're talking often about people that are smart, that are educated. This is what's said by, academics. This is what's said by university professors. This is what's said all over the place. This is not we're talking about people sitting around on a ranch and spitting chewing tobacco, that kind of Jew hatred. These are intelligent, highly educated people oftentimes. And you get statements like, when it came to defending the Palestinians, because the rockets weren't really hitting, because Israel is Iron Dome, right? It was only a handful of Israelis. I think there were 10 or so Israelis that were killed during that time by the rockets. I can't remember for sure, but it's such an insidious statement, such a ridiculous statement, that the morality would shift if more of the rockets hit home. Israel shouldn't have a defense mechanism, or Israel could defend itself if more Jews were dying, right? Then it would be justified for Israel to shoot back at 4,000 rockets coming to it. That to me is the scary part of this, right? You're talking about it's trickling down. My fear is that it's deeply rooted already.
Yeah.
Right. If you can take out one MP, Paul Manley, are we going to be able to replace him with somebody else, or is the next generation already growing up now with these views, just like at the heart of the soil?
I mean, this is the ultimate question for me of this experience, of the people younger than me and coming up in the progressive movement. The University of Toronto, I sent it right to CEJA and the folks at CEJA. The University of Toronto posted a job a few months ago for a lecturer for colonial studies, and one of the topics was Israel-Palestine. The U of T. So I mean, you're right, Rabbi, that it's beyond filtering down. It's becoming endemic on the left, and of course we have long time endemic anti-Semitism on the right that we all are aware of. So it's coming in on us a bit here. And I think, just speaking for me on the left, on the progressive side, I think it's just about engaging and re-engaging. The gentleman who was very upsetting in May for me, that he seemed very anti-Israel despite not having been, was a gentleman who was involved in Extinction Rebellion in Montreal. And I'd been helping day after day with Indigenous issues in Quebec. And when it came to this, he was held Jenica's position, held Mr. Manley's position. And after hours and hours of conversations, of laying things, again, these people don't know about the Sykes-Picot agreement. They don't even realize what happened in 48. They don't know anything. So, after a few hours, I think we got to the point where, he accepts Israel's right to exist. But that's not good enough. I mean, that's just not good enough. So I think that there's a lot of, again, I think for us in the community, it's about the Liberal Party of Canada. It's about, obviously the NDP and the Greens as well. But I think the NDP and the Greens are a bit lost now. Not provincially, not all their provincial cousins, but federally. So I think now the important thing is to have the Liberal Party remain on side. I think that, just like in the States, the important thing is to keep the Democrats as much as possible on side, because I think having bipartisan, multi-partisan support for Israel is still the most important thing we can do. The diaspora.
So you said it's coming in on both sides, and the problem for me is, on the right, the person with the Camp Auschwitz shirt that storms the Capitol, everybody condemns him, right? Everybody that is not a nut job recognizes how appalling that is. But when it's said by a journalist, right, an anchor on TV, on the news, a professor, a supervisor at work, right, the head of a corporation, a celebrity, these are the things that get said, and right, that's the one that gets unchecked and keeps growing. But I want to move on, because I want to have time at the end for some questions. If people have questions, please send me in the chat. If you have questions you want to pose to Noah, please send them in the chat to me.
Rabbi, just one point I want to make this to end that. was that David Suzuki, Dr. Suzuki, our most famous Canadian, getting himself involved with me, sending me nasty messages, doesn't want to work with me anymore on climate issues. Why? The whole man's career has been about being a naturalist, saving the planet. I'm there on the ground, willing and ready to work with him. No. Why? We know why. I know why. So that's what I would leave you with is you're right that that on the right, it's, you know, more of a Looney Tune situation. And on the left, it's Dr. David Suzuki and Elizabeth May and a whole other range of, you know, prominent people. You're right. So it's a big problem.
Like you said, you referred to Israel as the third rail, right? When you were working with the Green Party, it's become this line in tribalism, right? The whole idea, I think, today, coming oftentimes right from the left, is about different groups that may think differently and feel differently working together, focusing on, right, that's diversity, not the differences, but what are the commonalities between our groups despite our differences? Where do we line up? And when it comes to Israel, though, it doesn't matter if you check 9 out of 10 boxes, right? You fit in with somebody. Israel is where they'll kick you out. You're persona non grata. So I want to ask you, your story reminded me a bit about, I don't know if you remember, it was in the news a while back. It was 2013. Justine Sacco was a woman, she's actually a PR professional. And on a flight to South Africa, she tweeted something really offensive that she should not have tweeted about Africans. And 11 hours later, when she turned on her phone and she had landed, that had been retweeted tens of thousands of times. It was trending on Twitter. She lost her job. She, right, this quick tweet that she didn't put a lot of thought into, was a bad joke, really ruined her life. And we've seen that happen over and over and over with social media. So my question to you is really, right, do you regret having posted this?
Not for 1 second. I mean, my regrets involve the beginning, you know, joining the party in the first place. And I mean, more of my regrets surround the previous July and knowing who Mr. Manley was, knowing who Elizabeth was, right? But no, this is what you're seeing on the screen is born of my experience as a Jew living in North America, having experienced, like all of us, this terrible May. I mean, what I experienced, what Anime experienced, so many of my friends experienced at work, seeing their colleagues on Instagram tweet anti-Israel things, people they'd worked with for years. You know, my friend was driving down from 7-Eleven at Dundas, but you know, by Dundas Square, about May 13th, the day before I posted this, and her and her boyfriend are cycling down Dundas to hearing chants of "Death to the Jews, death to the Jews." All these little kids, and they're 15, 16-year-olds screaming "death to the Jews" in Toronto, in downtown Toronto. So no, I mean, and I can, you know, just to allay everyone's concerns, it did not end my career or my political career. I think the country reacted sort of half and half, the political class, I should say. Many people were very supportive who didn't even know me. You know, I previously worked for CTV, for Discovery Channel with Bell Media, and many of the folks at Bell and CTV were very supportive. Unfortunately, and I haven't talked much about this, with a few exceptions, CBC was terrible to Anime and I. There are so many issues related to CBC and CBC News English that have to be addressed, not just on the right, but on the left. I was so sad to see Carol Off go today. Many will laugh, knowing Carol Off's history with Israel-Palestine on CBC Radio. We have a lot to do with how folks reacted to what happened. And of course, I really do want to mention that so much of Anime's experience was related to anti-Black racism, right? Those dual identities, and being, you know, first generation immigrant, you know, first generation Canadian, a daughter of immigrants. And so much of that, but again, I think I really want to make this clear. I have previously that the reason that Anime was, what happened to myself and Anime, at the end of the day, yes, there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of discrimination, but the reason the party destroyed Anime was because the fact that she was Jewish. Period. That was her only mistake. That was my only mistake. And I think that you see a lot of the Green parties who are competitive now provincially, like Mike Schreiner in Ontario here, just completely say we want nothing to do with that and we support Anime Paul.
I loved your rant that you do not regret, not even for 1 single second, that you posted that.
Not for 1 second, not for one
and
second.
It ties back to what we were talking about, of what my congregant said to me of, right, what is the point of having a seat at the table or sitting at the head of the table if you're not going to speak up? Our next big holiday coming up is Purim, and that is the story of Purim. Esther is in the castle, she's with the king, and she's afraid to speak. And that's what Achashverosh says, is what is the point of you being there so you can live in the castle while the rest of us die, right? Yeah. While everyone else is no more. Right? What is the point? You are there to speak up. So my question is just, because I speak to university students who hear something from their professor and they don't want to speak up. They don't want it. They're afraid that their grades might be on their line, or people that are starting out a career in a law firm or in another industry, and they don't want to speak up. So they're afraid of the consequences, whether it's socially, whether it's with their job, whether it's their friends, their family even, right? I know families that this is a topic why people don't want to talk to each other. So my question is what advice would you give to somebody who hears something about navigating that, of when do you bite your tongue and when do you speak up and just say whatever the consequences are, this is what I'm here to do. This is what Israel needs. This is what the Jewish people need.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think everybody who was in any business, or whether it be a lawyer, doctor, whatever profession they're in, teacher, dealt with this exact situation in May when this all happened. For me, I can only speak for myself. And for me, I have this list here that I made, chat, USDS, Beloim. What's the point of all my Jewish education? What's the point of USDS, I'm looking at my list now, of Camp Kadima, of Beloim, of Hillel, of all the birthright trips I took, of CIC, even when I was 23, putting me in that position. What's the point of it if I'm not going to speak up for the community, for my community, in this essential moment, and it was not, and for us, it was not just about the community and about what was happening, but about the whole larger progressive movement that was going to this anti-Israel sort of stance, thanks to AOC and thanks to a lot of the Corbynites in the UK. So we want to stop that. We were trying to stop that, but they stopped us. They stopped us. But at the end of the day, to your point, I couldn't just sit there. I'm writing, you can imagine me writing the post right before Shabbos on May 14th. What is the point of my life, graduating chat, with a Avad Israel, love of Israel, if in this one moment, I felt like this is the moment, this is the time, I have to speak up and speak out. The consequences, Rabbi, if I hadn't said anything, would have been much greater than if I had. My sub was watching from up above, right? So my point is the consequences of not posting that for me and my life, and for just for me, much greater than whatever. I mean, and there were there professional consequences? Yes, certainly there have been. Have there been benefits as a result of my strong stand? Yes. So lucky to be with Aurora Strategy Group and Marcel Wieder, who reached right out, as this was happening, and say, come join, come with us. We're Zionists. Don't. So again, half and half. For every CTV, there's a CBC, in many different parts of the story.
That's what I love. What you said is that it wasn't that you were canceled when this was done. You lost one job, but you got another one, right? You had other opportunities. People reached out to you. Not everybody just labeled you persona non grata. What is your relationship now like with Anime? You guys work so closely together for so long. What would you say to her if you were able to now, or have you spoken to her?
No, unfortunately, we haven't. I've told the press this as well, that unfortunately, when Jennifer crossed the floor, We felt the need, both of us, there was so much anti-Semitic abuse coming at us online, death threats, and just crazy, crazy things that were happening, that we would not, speak through essentially the time that a lot of the legal stuff was happening. And then we just never spoke again. To me, a lot of what I was doing with, with Anime was actually not a job. It was kind of just an opportunity. I was working freelance doing public relations, but an opportunity to take on a client who I knew through my friends, where I could help, and essentially what happened was, my friend called me and said, "Can you help Auntie Claire's daughter-in-law do this thing?" I said, "Yes, 100%, whatever you need." So that's sort of how it all sort of began. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure I did fully.
You did. I'll again remind everyone, because we're going to only go a little bit longer. But if anybody has any questions, please send them to me in the chat. I've gotten a few questions, but I think we've touched on them in our discussion. I've also gotten a lot of, congratulations to your adulations of just thanking you for what you've done. All right. Thank you, Noah, for your courage, unapologetically advocating for Israel in the Canadian Parliament. Right. There are questions about what practical ways we can do Hasbara work. And we touched on it a little bit, but is there anything else on that you would add of practical ways that the rest of us that don't get a bigger platform can do?
I think it's, from a micro perspective, it's about those conversations with colleagues, non-Jewish colleagues, sometimes Jewish colleagues even, about the realities on the ground in Israel. And then on a macro level, as we've spoken about, and this is going to take UJA and CJA and everyone sort of to come together in the same way that we did with shared values during the Second Intifada, which is to say, how do we engage the important people in Canada under the age of, let's say, 30, 40, people coming up, so that, we need to have an answer, Rabbi, for the TDSB folks who are taking their students out saying free Palestine without any, context. We need to be, that's the age of where we need to be as well, right? So we need to be thinking at every age group, how do we do the Hasbara? And every different sort of community. So again, we've talked a lot about the queer community, about the gay community. There are all sorts of different communities. I'm thinking about, the biker community. As we know, there's a whole biker folks who are Jewish bikers. Bringing those folks to Israel and bring all their non-Jewish biker friends with them. Have them experience it together. I mean, a lot of what I'm suggesting is going to take, obviously, money, but it also takes organization, both on the ground and in Israel and here as well. And then the follow-up. So all the follow-up work that Birthright Canada does, for example, that the trip doesn't end when you come back after 10 days. That's always, for those of you who have sent kids or grandkids to Canada Israel Experiences Birthright trips, the trip is an investment in the person, right? So we need to do the same thing with these folks, so that I'm not on the phone begging Jenica Atwin. This will happen a million more times over the years. Do you want to speak to my cousin in Yerushalayim? Who's, what are you talking? So we need to. But again, they didn't believe me. I'm just, I guess, to them a white privileged person, and that's how they've been sort of taught. Again, and we're going back to sort of these medieval tropes. They see these Jews as these all-powerful media influencers, crazy like tropes, and we have to. And there's no way around it. We have to take them. We've got to take them, show them. That's how we did it with the gay community. They were on Hilton Beach. They know it. They know it because they were there.
Someone wants to know, right, which political party in Canada in the current moment is the most favorable to Israel? Rather than asking you to endorse a political party, I'll maybe change it a little bit of, right, how do you decide going forward, right, your support? Because you're somebody who is a staunch Zionist, but you also very much care about what is a big part of the Green Party's platform, things like the environment, climate change, and other rights for Indigenous minorities, and a lot of what the Green Party stands for and the Liberal parties stand for. So how do you balance your support, whether it's your time, your energy, your knowledge and abilities running campaigns, and also just your vote when it comes to those two sides where they often aren't in the same party.
Yeah, we're in a civil war on the left. That's what's happening. It's similar to previous iterations, but that's what we're dealing with, is a civil war on the left to define Israel, to define what it means to be Jewish. One group I left out of my Facebook post was BLM. I think that, to answer the individual's question, I think there's no question that the Conservative Party is the most favorable to Israel. And I say that just linking back to what the rabbi said, it kills me because, I'm a liberal, progressive, really, 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 I believe in, a basic income. I believe in changing our economy so that we're really doing this, the idea of a green shift. And so I'm not a Harper voter, not a conservative voter. So it's a terrible thing that this has happened. And I think that's why we have to build it back up. And I'm hoping that, both provincially here, that what we see in other provinces, we have Stephen Del Duca here with the Liberal Party and other folks throughout the country, that they're going to bring in, pro-Israel, Zionists who are also, like me, progressive. The idea that they're not linked is again, as we talked about previously, is silly. And again, going back to this idea of pride in the queer community, good luck at Pride in Ramallah. Do you know what happens at Pride in Ramallah? They push you off the roof. So good luck. Have fun. It's not black and white. This is what I'm saying to Jenna Gatwin. You can picture me on the phone. Jenica, if you're in Ramallah as a woman, as a gay person, it is different than being in Tel Aviv. Worlds apart, worlds away, centuries apart in some capacities. So, this is, again, there are a lot of issues related to a Palestinian justice that I believe in. A lot of issues that I'm, consider myself like an old laborite, right? Not a Likudnik, but again, they've made us all Likudniks. Does that make sense? They've made us all Likudniks because it's either destroy the state or not. There's no, and again, to have that filter into Parliament Hill, to our politics, very dangerous. And so, proud to have spoken up. And I actually thought my post, you'll laugh at me, I thought it was quite vanilla.
It sounds like what you're saying, though, is actually to answer another question we have of, right, is there a space for progressive Zionists in these parties? And it sounds like you're saying that you've optimism, at least for the future, that it's possible to bring in candidates, to bring in supporters, to do this haspara, this education, and to not have to do what I know in the United States. I've met many a person who, as a Jew, disagrees with so much of Donald Trump's everything, but would then say, but I voted for him because he supports Israel and he's the best thing for Israel. And it sounds like you're saying, right, that's not what you have to do, that there is an ability to change those parties, the progressive parties, to create a space for a progressive and Zionist outlook.
We have to. It's our only option. We can't abandon.
Well, you could vote for the other side, though.
No,
but you're saying
it's a good point to call me on. And I guess my answer to you is that I'm not a conservative. I'm just not a conservative, right? I don't believe in conservative values. I grew up in a liberal, shout out to my parents watching. I grew up in a liberal home with educators, we're union people. So, on the streets, against Mike Harris. So it's anathema to me, the idea that I would ever be voting conservative. But, I guess, what I would leave you with is that, when they brought us, Canada Israel Committee at that time, now CIJA, to Parliament Hill, 6 of us, 2008, a conservative, a liberal, conservative, a New Democrat. Right? That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it, because again, we can't go the route of leaving entire parties, like the entire Democratic Party, the entire Liberal Party of Canada, to these reactionaries who will take it over. I mean, the notion of AOC challenging Senator Schumer in a primary for the Senate. I mean, this is what we're talking. This is how it begins, though. It's not, you know, it's this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So we need to be on guard and develop the Richie Torreses. And again, I'm not using a Canadian example because there really are none. We need, shout out to, my dear friend Melissa Lanceman, who I was my roommate in Ottawa that year that we were CIC interns. She was the year before me, got up and defended Israel in Parliament incredibly during the TDS beef fracas. I'm sure many people saw. I just thought to myself, amazing, amazing, amazing. Where is the person on the Liberal Party to do the same thing? Where? Luckily, we have Anthony Housefather. We have a number of very good people in the Liberal caucus. But again, a lot of Liberal MPs signed that terrible letter during the May conflict. A number of Liberal MPs who I referenced in my Facebook post feel the same way as Jenna Gatwin, feel the same way as Paul Manley. They just don't get the kind of attention, right? Because the Liberal Party, the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, ensures that doesn't happen, keeps them on side. You have Mark Garneau, the day after Jenica is brought over to the Liberal Party, Mark Garneau is in the House of Commons saying, we are against the idea of apartheid. We love Israel, right? She's made to change her position. So that's all good. Let's keep it that way, because it's even the notion that they wanted to welcome her in, knowing everything, is that's not a good thing to me. That's not a good thing. It should still be in caucus. And so again, it's a frightening time. And again, my mezuzah is not up in my apartment yet. I don't feel comfortable to put my mezuzah up yet, because ultimately my name is still out there. The situation is still live in some ways. And they followed me, right? They followed me to Aurora Strategy Group now, working with clients. They see my name on a press release. They're at me, right? Nothing to do with anything other than I am a Jew. I am a Jew. This is the fundamental connection to all of this, and all of what Anime experienced, what I experienced, was about our Judaism and about a fundamental. And I'm so glad I took Jewish history at CHAT in grade 12. Half the year was in grade 12 was history of the Holocaust, and half the year was Arab-Israeli conflict. Grade 12, I still remember that course. Dr. Rabbi Aronson, and it spoke to these medieval anti-Semitism, medieval tropes, Jews controlling the world, the media, this is who they thought we were, because they only knew Jews unfortunately from Seinfeld. Anime's executive assistant, wonderful girl who we worked so closely with, was so supportive until the very last day, said to me that she did not meet a Jewish person until she was 18. This was the case for many, many people that I interacted with in the Green Party during this time. Many of them had never met a Black person or a Jewish person in real life. Never. To me,
I'm just surprised. That's the part I would have thought
crazy. But like, I'm a Jewish person, I can understand maybe. But I mean, this is how. So again, it's all online, and it's just a pervasive thing that we're dealing with now. And I'm really going to be supporting CEJA and other organizations in the community on Bill C-36, advocating for it, which is to stop the proliferation of online hate. And again, Texas, I mean, the terrorist in Texas was known to authorities. He was known to British authorities. And the reason he was known to British authorities was because of the online rapid proliferation of anti-Semitism, where we can tie people to this. So when someone threatens my life or threatens Anime's life, we take it seriously. We take it seriously. What happened in Texas, I think what happened to sort of all of us.
It's absolutely true. It was shocking to turn on the news after Shabbat to see what was going on there. And I mean, something I've spoken about before, that when I'm very involved in various interfaith efforts, And when I talk with the Christian clergy, with the priests, with the ministers, even when I talk with imams in our groups, they don't have the same scenario that every rabbi I've ever spoken to in the last few years has had, which is they sit there during Shabbat or a holiday service and they ask themselves, right, where would I tell people to run if somebody came right in right now to do something? If somebody came with the intention to do harm to us while we are praying, where would I tell the congregation to go? Which door, which exit? Where would I tell them to hide? And it's a different world that we live in as Jews right now. And it's like you said, it's all of us. We all know that there's a real possibility. I just want to thank you for speaking to us, and I know that the congregation is incredibly appreciative of you sharing your story, and right, just as an example, right, when it comes up with Purim, that idea of there's no point in having a seat at the table if you're not going to use it, if you're not going to speak up, and you spoke up, and that's how
I got my Gregor.
Well, that's how things are hopefully going to change. I don't know if everybody on this call is as optimistic as you are that we can make those changes in the liberal parties. But like you, I have a lot of liberal values. I'm not at home in the right. I'm also not at home in the left. I'm somewhere in between. But it scares me what is happening. It very much scares me that you cannot really be Jewish. And by Jewish, I mean support Israel as part of your Judaism, which is what it means to be Jewish. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything Israel does. I've criticized Israel from our Bima before for various things, but the same way you can love Canada and criticize Canada, right? But no one accuses you if you criticize the government of not supporting the existence of a Canadian country. And it's okay to criticize Israel, but like you said, it's the support for Israel. Once you get to this area where if you support Israel, you're persona non grata. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with everything Israel does. If you're not a Likudnik, if you want the women of the wall to have a spot to pray, if you want any of these liberal valued things, and you criticize Israel, if you support Israel in the slightest, you're persona non grata. So the way to change it is to speak up, and I hope you've inspired some people to do that.
Yeah, and provide that history. I mean, provide that, tell people, you're challenging our indigenous connection. Do you know what's on the Dead Sea Scrolls from how many thousands of years ago? It's Hebrew. Like
Jews, Judea.
Like, I mean, it's so, we're praying Pesach every year to Yerushalayim what are they talking about? The whole history of Western civilization. The beginning of the internet in 2000 was sort of the beginning of civilization for so many millennials on down. And that's how we have to approach it, right? From that perspective, meet them where they are. So I want to see, Hebrew Hammer TikToks or Twitches or, all those things. We've got to figure it out. So I'm optimistic. And thank you so much, Rabbi, for having me and the whole Beth Tikva community. It just means the world. And wherever I stand, I'm going to stand with Israel the rest of my life. So don't worry about it, no matter how it affects me in terms of my career, because how it affects me and my life and my community is the most important thing. So thank you, Toda Rabba. Happy to come back anytime and update you on the progressive world, and hopefully it'll be good. It'll be good updates.
I'm sure we would love it. We would absolutely love it. Thank you again, Noah. We really appreciate it. I see some applause, some thumbs up, all sorts of things happening with the crowd. Really, it's you're a role model, and I hope that people follow your example. They use their chance to speak up. And to everyone else for joining us tonight, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of the conversation virtually. We're sorry we couldn't be in person. I was really looking forward to being in a room with you, Noah, but and everyone else that's joining us, hopefully one day soon. In the meantime, people that are looking for virtual content, there is all sorts of stuff, where to find it online, on our social media, and on the Beth Tikva YouTube page. You can find all sorts of great programs, just like tonight, but not with as good of a guest as we had tonight. That's a unique experience. Better. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you so much.